All right, everyone. So buckle up and prepare for 3.5 hours of pure value, expert panel discussions, master classes, hands-on workshops covering all key aspects of sales development mastery. So let's go, shall we?
Sure. Our first panel is dedicated to the first and by far the most important part of sales development, precise prospect targeting and discovery. First off, let's meet our expert speakers. Deepak Vadera, Director of PLG Sales at Dealfront. Tim Kakir, as CEO at Task Drive. Brad Smith, Account Executive Team Lead, EMEA at HubSpot. We are so happy to have you here today.
Same here. Very excited.
Yeah, can't wait, guys. Really looking forward to today.
Thanks, Olivia. Thank you for having me for another year.
We're super excited as well. So a note to the people in chat, please ask your questions and we will address them with the speakers later on. Now let's kick things off with some of our questions. And the first question, in your experience, what are the key challenges or common pitfalls that SDRs face when building their ICPs, and how can they be mitigated? Well, Brad, probably let's start with you.
Yeah, let's do it. I think there's so many kind of things to unpack on this question. I think it's a great question. I think the kind of main one and the big focus that I've always had kind of with any SDR team that I've been running or leading is around an ICP being too broad. I feel like so many people kind of sit there and they go, oh yeah, they could do with our product, or yeah, but they have that challenge that may be able to be fixed. And the issue is you're then kind of reaching out to a ton of different people that work in a ton of different industries. And it's really hard to kind of get that messaging right. So I think the key thing is to really be uber focused or laser focused, whichever way you want to look at it, onto what your ICP is. And I think that's the sort of key there. And you want to be so specific down to the point of, not just the job title, but the types of responsibilities that person has in exactly the type of industry and what kind of sub-industry that you're looking to kind of focus on. And really then as an SDR, your job is to actually become become an expert on that particular industry. Because once it's really clear and you're laser focused, it's so much easier then to be really, really the kind of product expert, or at least the industry expert on that particular subject.
Thank you. Deepak, what can you add here?
I guess to add to that, I think the lack of understanding of who their ICP is usually boils down to them not even knowing who their own customers are often at times. Like, why did so-and-so buy? Why then? What are those customers really like? Are there certain patterns that you've identified, or can you see those from conversations with CS and having that active feedback loop through management through CS? And I guess that lack of understanding, again, of the ICP is often fueled by that misalignment with marketing as well, which tends to occur normally as the company scales and grows. Sales have their own numbers to hit and marketing have their own areas to focus on. And that misalignment just comes into play. And it's imperative for leaders on both sides to come together and remind everyone that we're aiming towards a one goal, and ultimately both objectives are intertwined there. What I've also seen in the past and still see to this day is not having access to the right data or up-to-date data causes further friction or leads to further pitfalls in terms of identifying the right ICP or keeping tabs on changes in market conditions and updates that are taking place in the industry.
Thank you for sharing. Tim, what's your thoughts?
I think everybody said some great stuff here, but I'm just going to go back a little bit on what Brad was saying. And to be honest, to summarize it, is really resource allocation, right? If you're allocating your resource to everybody but anybody, that might buy your product, might buy your service, you're not going to close as many deals. And your sales cycle potentially is going to be longer. You're not going to learn exactly to tailor the messaging. You're not going to know exactly how can you even refine your product, because you can also bring that feedback, right? As an SDR, you should also bring that feedback to your development team and to the rest. So for me, it's really the resource allocation. It's to really understand the niche ICP and not go broad, as Brad said as well, and I think Deepak touched upon that as well. And it's to be able to say, okay, my resources are on this ICP, on this ideal customer profile, because these are the ones that convert the fastest, and these are the ones that has the best NPS, and they're going to stay the longest, right? The longest LTV as well. So when you do that, you are growing. And if then you're going to start going into different verticals, because it starts being obvious that you're getting more leads from that side, and you're like, okay, well, let me revisit my ICP and then update that. I think we're going to talk about that in a bit, so let me stop it here.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. Okay, let's proceed with the second question. Finding the right balance between precise targeting and scalability can be challenging. And what strategies do you use to strike this balance in prospecting? Like for me as a marketer, this is the biggest challenge, actually, specifically when the product fits very carefully to a certain niche and certain audience, and you need to make a decision. Actually, do we want to, how to scale it? Is this audience has enough potential for scalability? So, Brad, what do you think?
Happy to jump in there. I think this is the age-old question since I had my first job in sales development. It's like, is it volume? Is it quality? Like, which is the best? And I feel like most things in life, people kind of think on the extremes. They think you've either got to be really uber focused on quality, or you've got to be making 1,000 dials a day, that type thing. And I think the real answer lies somewhere in the middle. And the way that I've always approached it with any SDR team that I've been sort of managing is around tiering your prospects. So, within any ICP, you're going to have, your tier 1 prospects. They're the VPs, the directors, the C-suites, who, if you have a conversation with them, immediately can become an opportunity. It can be fantastic. They usually hold the budget. And then you've probably got, your tier 2 and your tier 3 prospects who, might influence the decision, but might not be directly the right person. And I think that's kind of where you find that difference between targeting and the scalability piece. So I think with those tier 1 prospects, it's all about targeting them. It's about drilling down, knowing everything about them, all the personalization that you can find on them, and being really targeted with your outreach to them. And then maybe taking a bit more of a volume approach around those sort of tier 2 and tier 3 type prospects. And I think that's how you can kind of find a little bit of balance between the two. I think phone is obviously, and I know this is quite a controversial thing to say these days, but phone is still a great channel. And I think that can be a really useful tool to actually avoid having to fall into this trap of quality or quantity, because you kind of get a bit of both with the phone. If they don't pick up, you can do lots of dials. If they do, you can have a really personalized conversation with them. So that's kind of how I approach it, really.
Brad, I totally agree. I think it's because generally, for the most part, I've noticed there's been more of apprehensiveness from salespeople in terms of wanting to pick up the phone and making those dials. And I saw Tim nodding before. So I don't know. Do you want to chime in?
100%. I think that I love what Brad said, and I'm glad, Deepak, you got in there as well. Cold calling still works. It works for a lot of industries. There are certain industries it doesn't work. If you're going to sell it to CTOs of B2B SaaS in the US, forget about the CTOs. They're not going to pick up the phone. You're not going to get to them. But if you're going for a CFO, because that's your target or something like that, you potentially are going to get on the phone. So you really have to understand of your target, your ICP, and the persona behind it. Are they phone friendly? Do they like the phone? Do they still have, even SMS? Because SMS was gone. So when you send an SMS, everybody sees it. When is the last time you got an SMS on your phone? Very rare, So when you get it, you're like, oh, an SMS. It's in a green color. Normally you get iMessage and blue, or you get yellow and green in WhatsApps, right? So when you see that color, suddenly you're like, oh, I got an SMS. So that will alert you right away. But I was shaking my head, Deepak, because we have a lot of clients that come to us and they're like, cold calling doesn't work for us. And they're like, let's not do that. And we're like, no, we're going to do that the first month. We do that, and suddenly we find that cold calling really works. It's who do you call? When do you call? How do you call them? What's your messaging? And I think, as Brad said, if you know everything about that persona, you're going to speak their lingo. If you speak their lingo, if you speak their language from the first kind of 10 seconds, they're going to have a chat with you. And if you have a chat with them, then you might sell. But In sales, what do we want to do nowadays is to start that conversation. It's not to sell, it's to start a conversation. Because if we start conversing, maybe we're not going to sell to that person, and that person is going to say, oh, but my buddy in this business might utilize your platform, your service, and so on.
So you're actually referring to mostly customer development, right? It's more like, having those calls to identify the need, just to realize whether the product is a good fit. It's not a sales call itself, right? So it's mostly give me the idea about the business case. Let's say you met a person on a conference and you like, hey, I want to verify if my product idea will work for you and companies like you. Can I identify ideal customer profile out of this audience, right? So it's mostly not just hopping on the call with your potential leads or potential customers. It's mostly having those mutual conversations with people who are likely to share insights, right? Like industry representatives.
Well, I'd want to say something there, 100%. But also, if your lead research from the beginning is very good and is very targeted, you're not gonna converse with someone that has nothing to do with what you're selling, right? So again, and I always say this to my teams, and when you look at the process, and you have 10 steps, if you keep optimizing step 1, step 10 optimizes as well. Right. And we forget, me even as a CEO, sometimes I go to step 7 and I'm trying to optimize step 7. But if I just work on step 1 each time, that automatically gets better. So if your lead research gets better and you're starting to get really down to that niche and the data is correct and the people are correct, you're going to have a better time and you're going to sell much better. So I think it's really going back to that. And Olivia, I think you said it. It's, the user research should have been done already, but it's really, what I call as well is a bit like the collaborative problem solving. So you get on the phone or you get on a discussion with someone is because they have a problem, right? And hopefully you are the solution. Your business, your service, your product is the solution. But together you're collaboratively solving a problem. And if you do that with a lead, they close themselves. They close themselves because they see that you have the solution. You came up with the solution together, and they feel empowered. They're like, oh, well, I came up with the solution with you. They'll close,
Right.
But if you
like,
try to push them, they're not going to close.
Right?
Sorry? Yeah, I'm heard. Exactly. That's what it is. Yeah.
And I think to piggyback off your point there, Tim, what I used to always kind of say to like my SDRs is, let's say using your example there, that they're reaching out to CFOs. Now, the fact is that SDR is probably speaking to more CFOs than that CFO is speaking to, right? So quite often they know a bit more about what other CFOs are going through and the common challenges than that CFO might even know itself. So I think, you never want this attitude, do you, of like, you're interrupting their time, you're giving them a call. Like you say, Tim, we're calling them with hopefully a solution to some of the problems they have. And if they don't have any problems that we can solve, that's fine. They might have wasted a minute of their time.
But I love what you're saying, Brad, because most of the time they don't even know their problem yet, right? But if you're asking the right questions and they're like, oh, wow, I do have that problem. And I think, Brad, is what you said, because if you're calling hundreds of CFOs a week and you spoke to thousands of CFOs in your career in the last few months, and you're speaking to one CFO and he doesn't know, he's like, oh, no. And then you ask a question and he's like, oh, yeah, I do have that problem. Oh, well, that is a serious problem. Why? Do you have a solution for that? Then you want that conversation. Now it's your turn to explain how you can solve that. So that's what we're trying to do in sales.
Yeah.
Challenging question. When we're talking about identifying an ideal customer profile and specifically having those customer development calls, which responsibility it is? Is it marketing responsibility, or it's a collaboration, marketing and sales, CEO of the company?
Olivia, sorry, just to confirm your question, is that around whose kind of responsibility is it to define the ICP, or?
It's like mostly, how this responsibility is split or shared between the departments. Specifically when we're talking about, hey, like once we are ready to say, this is our ICP, we need to run those calls. So how this, like, who is responsible for saying, like, hey, we did these calls, we analyzed these profiles, these potential audiences, and here we go with this and this.
Yeah, I mean, happy to chime in. I actually think Tim and I might have quite different answers for this, just because obviously Tim's a CEO and I'm not. But happy to chime in with mine, and it might ruffle a few of Tim's feathers. So no, I'm just kidding. But I think in most businesses, probably it comes from the top down in terms of what the ICP is, who we're trying to sell to. I mean, I'm not saying this is necessarily the right way, but I think that's quite often the case. I think, like most things, really the ICP becomes whoever it is that seemingly wants to buy your solution, whoever has those problems. It's a kind of natural thing to an extent. It's almost, the way I see it, it's like the value of something is what someone's willing to pay for it, rather than what someone values something at, So I think that's kind of my thought process on it a little bit. I think it's a team effort. And I think the key is that constant feedback loop around, actually, this isn't working, or we're having this feedback when we speak to this type of person, and that's how the ICP, I guess, develops. But I'll pass over to Tim, because I don't know if he's got a slightly different view on that.
Well, I love what you're saying, Brad. But also, let's not forget, Brad works for HubSpot. HubSpot is one of the biggest companies out there, right? So you guys have definitely defined that millions of times. You've optimized millions of times your ICP, your messaging, your website has changed I don't know how many times. Your pricing, like I was joking a few years ago, I think you have a team that says, how can we make our pricing more complex? And they try their best to make the pricing more complex, but nobody understands. They go to a free plan and they're like, oh, that's not enough for me. Let me buy $50 seats here, 10 of them. Let me buy marketing seats. Let me buy these seats. A joke, but it's kind of true, isn't it, Brad? I don't know if you have that team. I have to ask you, do you have that team really? Like pricing complexification team?
I'm not sure. I can't confirm or deny.
Awesome. But just to add something to what Brad was saying, and jokes aside, I think that especially on the early days, marketing is a long-term thing, right? It's a mid-term to long-term. You're not going to get answers about your ICP and stuff with marketing, right? So everybody should start outreach, outbound today, right? If you haven't done outbound, start it now, because you're going to have the quickest answer to your messaging. You're going to have the quickest answer to, is this my ICP? No, F off. And then you have so many of those, you're like, that's not my ICP, right? And you keep trying things. I think in sales, in 3 months, you are going to get answers. In marketing, it's going to take you 6 to 9 months to get just a little bit of an answer. So I think the combination, as Olivia, you were asking the question, and Brad, of course, in a size of HubSpot, I think it's top down, but in a size of my company, we all chime into that discussion, and I think this is why, if you do research a little bit about my past podcasts and stuff that I was saying, I think that marketing and sales should disappear. We should all be growth. We should all be a growth team, right? Because, marketing will say, here's an MQL, and then you're like, well, yeah, that's MQL. Okay. Is it an SQL? No, it's not an SQL. This is wrong. Oh, it's not closing. And then sales will say, well, marketing's bringing terrible leads. And then marketing will say, well, sales don't know how to close deals, and then I've seen this so many times. But when you put them in a room and you tell them, brainstorm together and work together for a month, and then they start loving each other, and then they start giving feedback to each other, and suddenly the ICP, that messaging is across the board, like not perfect, because nothing is ever perfect, but it starts becoming really, really good.
I think if I can just add some final thoughts there, just on that point, I think having that active feedback loop is absolutely imperative. So say, for instance, you're working with RevOps to understand and collect and analyze data on existing product usage, having that sent over to marketing to make it understandable in a way that's, again, easy for sales to digest, so they can make the adjustments that they can in their cadences and whatnot, and kind of go from there. So there is absolutely a need in terms of having everyone aligned and everyone on the same wavelength. So it is an absolute team effort.
So true. And this brings us to another question about methods. What methods do you use to research and get data for creating and refining your ICPs?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off again if you want me to. I think this is a really interesting question, and I think the answer to this probably really depends in terms of what type of business you're in, how big the business is, and things like that. I think probably in a lot of bigger businesses, a lot of this content probably does come across from marketing or from enablement in the form of training, where it's kind of very much, this is what you need to know. These are the challenges they're facing, etc. But I know a lot of people on this call today are going to work in probably smaller businesses where they might be the only SDR or one or two SDRs and not a huge amount of kind of training above them. And I think there's so many tools out there at the moment that kind of help you do that. I think it's just a case of getting stuck in. So, one example might be is if, let's say, for example, I'm just going to pick a random example, that you're focused on the telecommunications industry, okay, in the UK. Now, the first thing I would probably do if I started a job in there is find loads of industry white papers, anything I could get free online that I could download as a PDF, pay ChatGPT, whatever it is, for the slightly premium version, upload all of these PDFs and say, draw down what are these biggest challenges that these telecommunication companies are having. It sounds really like simple and obvious, but it's such an easy way of doing it. And I find anything to make my life easier, and that saves me time. So that's probably what I would do, and find out what those challenges are. Gather data about the industry, really find out what's going on. Because that effectively, like Tim says, allows you to have the best conversations. And that's all sales is at the end of the day, is having a conversation and hoping that you kind of hit jackpot, really.
I mean, if Brad, I smiled when you said ChatGPT, because I was hoping that somebody's going to bring it up, because all my webinars I just speak about ChatGPT lately. That's been my obsession the last year. And come on, $20 a month for the advanced data analysis. Now that Brad's saying, upload your PDFs, upload your whole export of your CRM, of close lost, all of them, just upload it and ask those questions, and you will be mind blown. I did this on a webinar and people were mind blown. Like, you can do that. And I didn't even I was just doing it live. Just upload that CSV with that Excel sheet, whatever you have, as an export, ask these questions. And it's going to really brainstorm from an angle that doesn't have tunnel vision. We have tunnel vision. We all have tunnel vision in our companies. It's, in the first month you start getting tunnel vision because you meet the CEO. It tells you the mission, vision, values of the company. You're like, okay, that's it. And you suddenly are in that tunnel now. So ChatGPT really helps me get out of that tunnel vision. So I definitely recommend it for everybody. But if I may, and I know, Deepak stopped me because I'll speak for hours. But I think that there's a combination of a few things, and I'll just tell them and I won't get into them. But internal data, that's what we're saying with Brad, upload it and get that. Surveys and feedback, 100%. Market research. Don't do just market research before you start your startup or whatever. Keep doing market research, because the market changes a lot, as we know. Social media and online communities. We don't tap into this enough, and online communities are everywhere. Reddit. If you're a bit geeky or product or something like that, you want a good community, go to Reddit and say something wrong about that and see what's going to happen. And then they'll all attack you, and then you'll learn so much from it. It's incredible. I was just reading this. Somebody was saying they have 2 Reddit profiles. They have one which is for themselves and positive stuff, and they have one, they ask a question and then they go with the other one and they give a wrong answer, because nobody wants to help people, but everybody wants to correct people.
So true.
Yeah, and then you can have, obviously, like us, we do market research, we do lead research for you. We've done it for 500 plus customers, so we know a little bit the ins and outs of that. And then keep doing those interviews with your customers. Tap into lookalike audiences and see if that lookalike audience is it working. If it's working, that means you do have a good audience. Look at your competitors, keep analyzing them, and many other things that could add here. But I think that today, almost ending 2023, we have AI. We have this amazing tool of AI. It can search the web, maybe not the free version, of course, and maybe the Bing search is not amazing, but there's many other tools out there. There's plugins. You can actually get those answers in minutes instead of months. Before, we would give a project to someone and wait for months. Now we can actually get that almost in half an hour. You can get these answers.
Tim, to your point, I think communities like Reddit have been incredibly powerful. People aren't so worried about opening up about their true state of affairs or what's taking place in their companies, because, again, they can remain truly anonymous and no one can trace it back to who they are, versus for example, on LinkedIn, where people might be a bit more apprehensive to say certain things because they know their colleagues and peers are constantly keeping an eye on their content and so on. So there's a wealth of information being shared in these communities that hasn't really been tapped into by a lot of people. At Dealfront, again, shameless plug, since we offer a data enrichment and sales intelligence tool, we've been pretty much drinking our own champagne in that sense, and combining that with a series of automations, kind of to what Brad and Tim mentioned, again, having established a lead scoring model, and then being able to better prioritize what leads should we dedicate more attention and focus on, and then combining them with tools like Built With, for example, have been incredibly useful for us, since we have a web visitor product, and we can analyze and see what other tools or what other software have companies incorporated it onto their website, and see where our lead feeder product can help complement those efforts. And for example, if we identify they've got the HubSpot plugin, we know that chances are they're most likely using HubSpot as their CRM. And since we have a native integration with HubSpot, it kind of opens up the door for us to plug that in, and yet becomes another avenue for a conversation starter too.
I love what Deepak said, and I'm just going to go back to something you said, drinking our own champagne. I prefer it so much more than what my business partners and we say. It's eating our own dog food. So I'm going to change that to drinking our own champagne. That's so much better.
Yeah,
thank you.
Slightly nicer.
Yeah, my sexier. I like it. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing. And we also started to talk about the ever-evolving ICP, which brings us to another question. How, with actually ever-evolving buyer personas and market dynamics, how do you ensure that your ICP remains relevant and up-to-date? And what's your approach to adapting your ICP over time?
Probably I can start. I'd say just being aware of the market dynamics, assessing and anticipating where the trends are heading towards, what's happening in the industry. For example, again, for us, looking at the lead feeder product as a silo, we know that third-party cookies are going to be sunset in a couple of months, and we're already gearing towards how we can how companies can go forward from when that happens. So just understanding better what's happening in the industry, what are the other players talking about, and the implications of certain things if companies don't think about them. So yeah, just being, I guess, on top of where the market is heading into, and trying to assess the implications of not doing or of not taking the right approach, which your product can ultimately fix. Just staying ahead of the curve.
Just going back to something, it's we were talking. I think Brad started the conversation about TAM, target addressable market, if I'm not mistaken, and I want to bring that back, because if your target addressable market in the beginning, was 100,000 companies, and you are at 95,000 companies already in your portfolio. Let's say it's crazy numbers, but then you might want to really start looking at renovating your ICP and so on. If your target addressable market is only 100 companies, if your average revenue per account is huge, that's going to be enough. But if you're just selling a SaaS product at $500 a year, you don't have a good business there. Change that, check some different ICPs. But also, I think that we at Tastra, we just did the exercise ourselves of changing our ICP again, like optimizing and re-discussing and brainstorming and hashing out our ICP. Why? Because we have that data of customers, right? So when I look at past data of 3 years of our customers, and I suddenly see that there is a few customers that has been with us with no problem, and they're all in the same industry, and that wasn't in my ICP, I'm like, oh, there's something wrong here. Hold on, guys, what's happening here? They're my top customers. They're all in the same industry. They pay the biggest bucks, and in 3 years, they haven't even complained once. And then I look a little bit more. They've been together with us even 5-6 years, and you're like, okay, why don't we have this in the ICP? Our ICP was something completely different than that, and we have changed it because we have data to back it up now. And I think there was a concept of core customer, and I kind of mentioned in the beginning, it's really the people that stay the longest, that causes you the less problems, right? And that pays you the most money. They're happy, and if they're happy, you're happy.
Brad, what's your point here?
Yeah, exactly. I think, to be honest, Tim and Deepak there, made some really great points, and I kind of agree with both of them. I think kind of the only thing to add on that, I think, is more of maybe an SDR that's on the floor and how they would maybe think about it. Is just keep a pulse check on the deals that are closing. Like, just have a look. It doesn't have to be necessarily particularly data driven, but what are the AEs closing? Like, who are they speaking to? Are the whether it's going from everyone speaking to marketing managers to now they're all speaking to sales directors, like, ask, why is that? Like, is the product kind of developing and supporting that? And I think just keeping a bit of a pulse on it. But I think I agree. And I think almost like what Tim is saying is like, there's no need to sort of change your ICP too frequently if it's working, and be focused on it. Don't sort of chop and change at the first sort of couple of days of it, of having a bit of a quiet process or whatever. So yeah, just stick at it and kind of know your ICP, from the ground up, and you're good there.
Thank you for sharing. We have 2 minutes left and a lot of questions from the audience. So I will ask you to stay for 5-10 minutes after the session and answer the questions in chat. But I think we'll still have time to cover one of them. In relation to allocating resources on prospects, what if you have multiple companies or products and you need to concentrate on? How do you then become an expert?
You have multiple products and multiple companies as an SDR. Well, you're kind of in trouble, aren't you? Because you're being a bit bipolar. You have to keep switching mindsets. You have to keep switching messaging. You have to keep switching things. So maybe get somebody else to do another of the product. I don't know if that helps, but that's the quickest thing that comes to my mind.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of echo what Tim's saying there. I think that's a really tricky situation to be in, and I think the saying is "Jack of all trades, master of none." I think you've probably got to embrace that if you are in that situation. I think just maybe kind of learn a script in terms of, right, these are the 5 different personas we're going after in completely different industries about different products. These are going to be the challenges. I'm just going to know it and kind of wing it. I know that doesn't sound like a very good answer, but the fact is you're not going to become an expert of 6 different industries, 6 different products. There's no chance. So just pick up the phone, have a conversation, and see what happens, really.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Brad.
Can I just add something to Brad? Because that quote is, I love that quote, and then I really dig into that quote, and actually the full quote apparently is, "A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one."
There you go.
I'll put it on the chat.
Yeah. to add to what Brad said, I think, if there's multiple products, there probably needs to be 2 sales motions. So yeah, maybe there could be one that's more product led versus another one being more sales led. So ideally having that split into different teams would make sense.
Thank you, our panel experts. What a great start of the event. Thank you all for joining us today and sharing this experience. And let's move to the second presentation.